What was some inspirations to you besides like initially watching Royce Gracie in the UFC and all of that, and coming up in MMA, like MMA inspirations?
So like I was as complete as I could have been for the time. So like my inspirations were pretty complete, but they were always still very jiu-jitsu centric. And that was because of, again, the principles of jiu-jitsu were always least path of resistance. You can be the smaller guy. Like other arts, you couldn't really be in wrestling. Like wrestling is like, all right, you know, if this guy's 3 pounds heavier than you, don't compete against. You know what I'm saying? Boxing the same way. So like, but jiu-jitsu was always smaller guys. And plus at the time, getting started, you know, there were a lot of like, you know, weight classes didn't really matter. So like that's the generation I'm from, where like weight class don't really matter. So like my inspirations were like Morello Bustamante, Fabio Dragel. I loved watching those guys. Ralph Gracie, I loved watching. Henzo. But then also too, like it's talking about being complete. Like I also liked watching like Jose Pele Landy. Like he was great. And he had some matches with Macaco, who was actually Charles Oliveira's coach. Right. So yeah, I mean we're talking, you know, 20-something years ago, but yeah. Pele Landy, Marco Huas. You know, these were the guys I looked up to.
Oh man, Pele. I mean, I guess a lot of people really don't know a lot of MMA history, but Pele from Shootbox. I mean, that one fight that he had, I forget the guy's name. He's a jiu-jitsu guy, but yeah, we're gonna have to pull that up on the show one of these days, because that was just, I mean, the start of really combining everything. But those Shootbox guys, you know, predominantly Muay Thai guys with a lot of jiu-jitsu black belts. I mean, those were you know, big time names, and you could only find those fights on the VHSs that you were talking about. So just, you know, talk about exposure and really the guys that know the history. And like you said, look at Murillo Bustamante. I mean, just his matches in the beginning, early prides were just clinics on jiu-jitsu and MMA. Yeah, so those are some really big names that we should definitely mention. You know,
and I mean, sorry,
I would be remiss if I didn't bring up these other two guys too, and that would be Rumina Sato and Max Sakurai. I have to, because like the Japanese martial arts MMA scene back then was. You know, it's a little sad to see like it's not as prominent as it used to be, but the Japanese martial arts back then was just outstanding.
Well, you mentioned shoot fighting. I mean, that's exactly what that was. I mean, Japanese shoot fighting with a different rule set, but people don't realize that Japanese shoot fighting is like a huge part of MMA history. Like you mentioned Rumina Sato and Sakurai. I mean, that guy, just his flying, jumping, spinning kicks, and he didn't even care if he landed on the ground because he was a great ground, you know, technician. These lightweight Japanese guys. How about the combat wrestling? We spoke about that on a couple of shows back. Nobody remembers combat wrestling, and that rule set, I think, could be amazing today because that's where it's kind of going. I mean, the Japanese shoot fighting and combat wrestling have a huge part that really nobody knows about.
Yeah, I mean, it sucks, man. Like when you think back of it, because I mean, Japan, like for me, like when I got started in this game, like my goal was to be able to fight in Japan. Like that was it. It was like, so man, you fight in Japan, you made it. And I achieved that really early. Like I went over there and fought Uno really early in my career. So like I was good. I was like, man, I'm good. My career is good. Who knew that I would end up, you know, 20 years later, still be doing this. But like being in Japan at those times, man, was the place to be. It was the mecca of really where martial arts was. That's where, you know, and I remember going there to them Shudo events for the first time thinking, man, these guys are so damn good. Like everybody was good. And I'd come back to the States and everybody was still kind of sloppy and, you know, but the tides have turned, man. Like, you know, the Americans just really took over. You know, just the influence of being in America, you know, I guess, I don't know what it was. Maybe I think you may be able to attribute that to like college wrestling or something, but I mean, it really just took over.
Yeah, and you talk about, you know, now that you're on the whole topic of the Japanese shoot fighting, I mean, when the Gracies kind of initiated this whole turn in martial arts that we saw with the UFC, and then everybody, like you said, was looking to Japan as like this mecca, I saw for the first time the true completeness of MMA in Japan, specifically for the shoot fighting. They were complete everywhere. They were judo black belts. They were ground technicians. Like Ruben Asado, like today, everybody's looking at the leg lock game and the Danaher guys, but Ruben Asado and all these guys, they were, to me, the OGs in the leg lock game, because they were already, that was in their normal days of training, like that was a normal thing. So for me, shoot fighting is insane. I love it.
Yeah, Sato was doing all that, been doing all that stuff, leg locks and flying arm locks, and he's been did all that stuff.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's crazy that we think we've invented this stuff recently, or this is a new thing, when, so many times we have this conversation, this stuff was being done at the turn of the century, in the early 1900s, things like that, where all these techniques were being used probably for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like there's nothing new under the sun. Things just get reinvented and come back around, or they're popular in the moment, trendy, but there's nothing new, man. Like, and but that's really what I love about martial arts too, is that when you break it down, really, it's art and science. The art is why it works, and the science is why it works. The art is how it works. So, when I talk about like the how, and I'm coaching people, I'm like, listen, these are the techniques. This is what's going to work. It's up to you to build it and put it in and paint your picture the way you want to. I can't tell nobody how to paint their picture, how to compete, how to be a martial artist. That's up to you to do that. That's your prerogative. It's either going to work or not based on the science, but the artistry of it is up to you.